The dusty horizon burned orange beneath the setting sun as the town of Red River prepared to close another long day, its wooden buildings creaking with the tired breath of men who had worked hard, gambled harder, and drunk their fill of cheap whiskey. But tonight something darker was unfolding on the main street, where the cries of a woman echoed sharp and desperate, a cry that rose above the clatter of hooves and the clink of spurs, a cry of betrayal because the rough hands that dragged her by the arm were not the hands of strangers, but her own brothers, a man whose greed had swallowed his heart whole, leaving only a shell willing to sell blood for silver. And as he pulled her stumbling form toward the waiting wagon of traders, whose eyes glistened like wolves, the crowd parted in a mix of pity and fear, no one daring to intervene, no one brave enough to challenge the cruel deal unfolding in broad daylight, until from the far end of the street came the slow, measured thud of boots against earth, steady as thunder on the plains, the kind of rhythm that made men glance up instinctively, for it belonged to a figure not unknown to the town, a tall cowboy dressed in worn leather that bore the scars of long rides and longer battles, his hat tilted low, but his eyes burning with the kind of calm fire that could unsettle the boldest of gunslingers. His name whispered on lips like a prayer and a warning: Colehart. The man who rode alone yet carried with him the weight of 100 storms, a man whose silence spoke louder than sermons, and when his gaze fell upon the struggling woman and the brother who pulled her with such disregard, his steps did not falter. They grew stronger, sharper, each one cutting through the tension of the crowd until he stood before them, his shadow stretching long and his voice, when it came, low but clear enough to still every breath. "That's far enough," the brother sneered, a cruel smile pulling his face tight, mocking the idea that anyone would interfere with his business, spitting the words out like venom. "Step aside, cowboy, she's mine to sell, and her price will buy me the life I deserve." But Cole didn't move, not an inch, his hand hovering near the worn holster on his hip, though his eyes never left the girl's, wide and terrified, her cheeks streaked with dust and tears, her wrists raw from the grip of betrayal. And in that moment something shifted, a silent promise sparking between her desperation and his resolve, as if fate itself had written this meeting long before either had drawn breath. The traders grew restless, muttering, eager for the transaction to end, eager for profit. But Cole's voice cut through their whispers like a blade. "You don't sell what ain't yours, and she ain't yours," the brother laughed. But it was a hollow, rattling laugh. "Everything's for sale out here, cowboy, even her. You got a problem? Then pay her price." The air tightened like a drawn bowstring, the crowd's eyes bouncing from man to man, waiting for gunfire, waiting for blood. But instead Cole reached into his coat, pulled out a worn leather pouch heavy with the sound of coins, silver he'd earned through backbreaking cattle drives and nights under merciless rain, silver he'd kept not for comfort but for survival, and with a slow, deliberate motion he tossed it at the brother's feet, the clink of coins scattering in the dust louder than any gunshot. "Her price is paid. She's mine now." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The traders cursed and the brother's greed flared, his hands trembling as he scooped the coins, eyes glinting with satisfaction. Yet beneath that greedy victory was the undeniable truth. He had lost her. For in this town, in this time, a paid debt was a sealed fate. Cole turned to the woman then, his gaze steady, not of possession but of protection, his words gruff yet tender enough to steady her shaking knees. "You're safe now. You walk with me." She stared at him as though seeing a miracle carved from dust and leather, unable to speak for fear that her voice would betray the storm inside her chest. But when he extended his hand, rough and scarred yet steady as stone, she placed her trembling fingers in his, and the world seemed to pause, the crowd watching as he led her away from chains and toward freedom, each step echoing louder than the brother's curses, louder than the trader's fury, louder even than the fear in her own heart. Behind them the sun dipped lower, bathing the town in shadows. Yet in those shadows a spark had been lit, a story of redemption, of a woman betrayed, and a cowboy who refused to let her be broken. And though danger still loomed, though the brother's greed would not be silenced and the trader's anger would fester, in that moment the woman belonged not to chains, not to betrayal, but to the man who had looked at her and seen worth greater than silver, a man who had called her his own, not as possession but as promise. And together they stepped into the unknown, carrying with them the hope that sometimes even in the harshest of lands, mercy could ride in on a lone cowboy's horse. And if you've been moved by this tale, if you believe in the power of stories where courage defies cruelty and love rises from dust, then stay with us for more journeys await. More battles of the heart and spirit are yet to come, and your support means the world, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because the next story might just be the one that changes the way you see hope forever. The night had fallen heavy over Red River, a velvet sky pierced by cold stars that seemed to whisper secrets only the desert could understand, and within that cloak of silence the woman sat beside the fire at the edge of town, her eyes flickering, with both fear and wonder as she tried to reconcile the truth of her freedom with the terror of what had nearly become her fate, her heart still trembling at the memory of her brother's grip and the hollow greed in his eyes. Yet beside her was Cole Hart, the cowboy whose calm presence seemed to steady the very air around them, his broad shoulders outlined by the firelight, his silence heavy but never cruel. And though he spoke little, his actions carried volumes, for he had set out food before her, offered her a blanket against the chill, and turned his gaze outward toward the plains as if keeping guard against every shadow that dared creep too close. She studied him carefully, her mind asking questions her lips dared not voice. Why had he paid her price? Why had he stepped in when all others turned away? What did he see in her that was worth risking his silver, his reputation, perhaps even his life? At last, unable to contain the storm within her, she whispered, her voice brittle like glass. Why did you do it? You didn't even know my name." Cole turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers, those steady eyes that held no judgment, only truth, and his voice came low and measured. "Didn't need to know your name to see you didn't belong in chains." His words struck her deeper than 1,000 promises, for no man had ever spoken with such simple conviction, and she felt tears rise unbidden. Not from sorrow now, but from the fragile bloom of gratitude, from the strange, new belief that maybe she had worth beyond what her brother could measure in silver. Cole shifted his gaze back to the fire, tossing another branch into the flames, the sparks dancing like restless spirits, and though he said no more, she felt something unspoken settle between them, a bond not of ownership but of destiny, as if the desert itself had decided their paths should cross. But peace, as always in the wild land, was fragile, and soon the echo of hooves shattered the stillness, a sound carried fast on the cold night air, the sound of pursuit, of men whose greed had not been satisfied. And Cole's jaw tightened as he rose slowly, hand drifting toward the iron at his hip, his body moving with the calm readiness of a man who had faced danger too many times to count. From the darkness emerged 3 riders, shadows outlined by the silver glow of the moon, their voices harsh, mocking. "Hart, you think a handful of coins can buy silence? That girl belonged to us and you cost us profit. We're here to collect." The woman's blood turned to ice, her body trembling as fear returned tenfold. But before she could speak, Cole stepped forward, his stance unyielding, his hat pulled low as he said, "I paid the price. Debt's settled. She's not yours." The riders laughed, their sneers glinting with malice. "Price was for her brother, not us. You think you can walk away clean? We'll take the girl and your life too." The tension snapped like a drawn wire, and in the space of a heartbeat the desert became a battlefield. Hands moved, steel flashed, and the night roared with gunfire. Cole's pistol cleared leather with the speed of lightning, his shots ringing true, dropping the first rider from his saddle before the man had even raised his weapon. The second barely had time to pull his trigger before Cole's bullet caught him square, sending him tumbling into the dust. But the third charged forward with a wild howl, determined to cut through the firelight and seize the woman, his knife gleaming cruel in the moonlight. She screamed, scrambling backward, her heart pounding in terror. But Cole was faster still, pivoting with deadly precision, his shot cracking the silence and the rider falling lifeless to the earth. Then there was only silence again, silence so thick it pressed against her chest, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the trembling breath she could not steady. Cole holstered his pistol slowly, eyes scanning the horizon for more threats, and when he turned back to her, his face was calm, though the firelight revealed the steel etched in every line of his features, the kind of steel forged only in men who had seen too much of the world's cruelty, and yet still chose to stand against it. She stared at him in awe, unable to speak, unable to understand how one man could carry such weight with such quiet strength. And finally she whispered, "They'll keep coming, won't they? They won't stop." Cole nodded once, a shadow crossing his eyes. Greed don't stop easy, but neither do I. His words, so simple yet filled with unbreakable resolve, struck her heart like a shield. And though fear still gnawed at her, hope had begun to burn brighter, a fragile flame she thought had long been extinguished. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her voice trembling. Then what do I do? Where do I go? Cole's gaze softened then, just enough to show her the man behind the iron, and he answered, "You ride with me. As long as I draw breath, no one lays a hand on you." Her tears came freely then, for never before had she been claimed not as property but as someone worth protecting, worth saving, worth fighting for. And though the road ahead was certain to be dangerous, for the first time she felt the stirrings of something she had almost forgotten, freedom, and the fragile seed of belonging. The fire crackled louder as if echoing her heart, and above them the stars burned bright, watching as a woman once betrayed and broken began to rise again beside the cowboy who had paid her price and called her his own, not in chains but in hope, not in silver but in promise. And together they turned their eyes to the horizon, ready to face whatever storms tomorrow might bring, knowing that, sometimes even in a world of dust and blood, salvation could be found in the unlikeliest of places. And if you've been carried along by this chapter, if your heart beats faster at the thought of courage, loyalty, and a love forged in the fires of danger, then stay with us, for the story is only beginning, and your support is what keeps these tales alive. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter will take you deeper into the storm, where sacrifice and destiny await.